Hi everyone and welcome to episode 98 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. At the moment, buyers are looking for opportunities. We've come out of a pretty quiet period, so people are looking to consider different things, particularly from an investment point of view, because there's been a lot of discussion around Melbourne being a market that there could be some growth over the next 18 months to 2 years. So people are thinking, where should I go? What should I buy? What opportunities do we have? Now, from an investor's perspective, we've talked very regularly on this podcast about the three key elements to drive capital growth. Those three things being obviously the underlying land value, which is really important, the scarcity value of the property, and a property having multifaceted demand, so not being reliant on one particular buyer profile to really drive that capital growth, gives you greater opportunities. So if budget allows, typically a single-fronted cottage or terrace house is going to provide the best opportunity for growth, ticking all of those three boxes because of the opportunities that they provide, the land value, the scarcity value, and also the fact that many different buyer profiles look to buy that type of property. They also meet with very strong interest from a tenant perspective. They're low maintenance, they're in good locations, and they're easy to live in. So the issue, I guess, for most people is that you're not going to get much change out of $1 million for that type of property, if at all. So that price is probably only going to rise over the coming years, given the expectation for value to be had. So others might then switch to looking at an apartment. Now, buying it, and when we talk about apartments, as I've said many times, we're talking about boutique, older style apartments in the inner city locations that we're talking about. So they are similar suburbs to these cottages. They're within about a 10-kilometre radius of the city, but they are more affordable. The issue is that you're still getting most of those components being ticked, but the land component of an apartment is obviously not as strong as what it is with a house. So perhaps the growth isn't going to be as strong going forward, and other reasons as well. But so what are some of the other options if you're perhaps prepared to move a little bit further out and consider different types of locations, perhaps more in the middle to outer ring suburbs that might still give some good prospects for growth? Well, from a housing perspective, in those locations, you tend to find that the properties are on larger blocks of land. There's more house, so they are typically more suited to families and owner-occupiers. Larger land, larger buildings means that it's suited to a more particular type of buyer profile. So even though they are further out, because it's a larger house and because it's larger land, the value is actually quite strong. So the rental demand may not be as consistent either. So there's limitations around that multifaceted demand element. And from an apartment perspective, if you go down that path, there's limited options. So when these boutique apartment blocks were constructed back from the 1930s through to the 1970s, these locations in that middle to outer ring suburb were considered the fringes of Melbourne, and they were, because there was not much further out. And as a result, land was relatively affordable in those areas, so these apartments weren't built in that type of an area. And therefore, housing being more affordable, that was the focus point. So what else could be considered in these locations? Well, townhouses are probably the first thing that jumped to people's mind, and there are more of them being built, but that has its issues as well. Townhouses typically have a lot more accommodation, and they're probably a little bit more modern as well, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, that type of thing. But they probably don't have the same level of scarcity value that we're looking for, because there are more of them being built in some of these middle ring type suburbs. They also have a much higher proportion of their end purchase price in the improvements, because they have been more recently constructed and because there is a lot more house, so to speak, as part of the purchase. Which brings me to the other alternative, which is what I wanted to talk about today, which is the villa unit market. Now, they do typically meet those three components for capital growth that we spoke about. They have a strong land component, typically because they're quite often considered to be undercapitalised in terms of the site that they're sitting on. They've got the scarcity value because they're not being built anymore. Developers look at it and say, well, I'm not going to be able to make a profit by putting three 2-bedroom units on 1,000 or 900 square metres in a suburb like a Camberwell or Surrey Hills. That's not profitable. So I need to put a lot more townhouses on there with a lot more accommodation to sell at the end of the day. So from a scarcity value perspective, they're not being built anymore. And from a multifaceted demand point of view, first home buyers like them, investors like them, downsizers like them, particularly for those that perhaps are looking at or have got a sea change or tree change type property and they're looking for a town base. A villa unit can be a good option for that from that point of view. Not so much perhaps the upsizers, which we look at from a cottage perspective, people coming from an apartment. Villa units perhaps aren't that, but they're still ticking boxes from all the other avenues, which is a good thing. So why are they a good alternative to perhaps the house or the apartment market? Well, compared to the cottages, they are definitely cheaper. I mean, cottages, as I said before, you're starting at $1 million. Villa units, and we'll go through pricing and things shortly, but they're certainly sub that sort of point. They're a similar size to a lot of cottages. They're 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. They've got a similar living space, depending upon how the cottages have been renovated. They've got similar outdoor space in terms of a courtyard or backyard with a cottage. So the outdoor entertaining area is not dissimilar. The benefit of a cottage is of a villa unit is that you'll get in most instances, or the ones that we want to focus on, a lock-up garage. Whereas with the cottages, a lot of it is still going to be street parking. And they're quite often in quiet residential streets, but if you select the right one, the location's still very good. So you've got good access then to public transport, local villages, that sort of thing as well. And as I said before, they're not being replicated. So you're not having any more of this type of property being built. And then from an availability perspective, and this is quite an interesting one, in that the single-fronted cottages and the older style apartments, they're typically, as we said before, they're limited to that sort of inner city area, which is good from a scarcity value perspective. There's only a 10 kilometre type radius, and beyond that, you don't tend to find many of them. Whereas the villa units have got a wider geographical area where you can consider them. So you can go to the next step further out, whereas the cottages and apartments, it gets to a certain point and you can't really go much further. Now, this provides plenty of opportunities, but it also provides plenty of risks. So by going further out, which we'll now go through. So there are certain elements that if you are considering buying a villa unit, that you need to consider, and you need to consider these very strongly and make sure that you get it right when you're selecting them. So the first one is around location. And it's very much based around, obviously being in the right street is very important, but proximity to services is a really important component when selecting a villa because of the location and the suburbs that they are in. So it's more that middle and pushing to the outer suburbs where they are located. And if you select the wrong one, by nature of the way Melbourne's public transport system works, it fans. So they get further and further out. The suburbs get bigger and bigger. And because the transport starts to become a lot more isolated, the units can be as well. So you need to make sure that you're selecting things that are close to public transport, close to a local village, and not 5, 6, 7 kilometres away, whereby then occupants of that property, tenants particularly, are having to look at driving to train stations. They want to be close. So make sure that you've got the proximity side of things right. Location's really important. The other thing with villa units is around floor plan. I think it's a really important component. You want it to be like a small house. So it's got an entry hall, and then you've got bedrooms leading off, perhaps a lounge dining area, and then a separate kitchen. So having a good floor plan works really well, and it can then lead to opportunities to add value. So if you've got the kitchen and the meals area and the lounge room all in the same spot within the villa, there's opportunities then to perhaps open it up and create open plan living, which gives more of a modern lifestyle to it. So floor plan works is really important. Some of the more entry and basic level villa units, the entry point will be directly into the lounge room rather than being into that little entry hall and having the rooms off. So again, making sure that it is more like a little house than perhaps like a basic apartment. Car parking, as we said before, is important. You want to have an attached single or double garage is the preference with villas. Carport can be okay, but the preference would be to have a garage. What you don't want to have, and again, what some of the more basic villa units have, is the tandem car parks down the driveway, or tandem carports. That's again a signal that it's probably more of the basic style of villa unit, and we want that more small house type feel. The outdoor space is another key component in making sure that you've got a good courtyard type area. Really, you want to be able to have perhaps a table and chairs that would perhaps seat 6 type people around the table, space for a barbecue, that sort of thing. So having a good courtyard is really important. Some of them, again, have only got little strip laneways, walkways down the back of them, perhaps only a metre and a half wide. And that doesn't provide the accommodation or the outdoor space that people are really looking for. They want to be able to have perhaps a space for a dog, pet, that type of thing. So having that is really important. The other thing to consider and to look at from a contract point of view, and particularly the title, is whether or not that outdoor space is actually on title. So quite often with villa units, it's not, so you may not have exclusive use over it. So make sure that you're checking the title to make sure that that's all correct as well. Really, the bigger the better for courtyard and outdoor space with villa units. The size of the development's really important, so the number of the units that sit within. Ideally, it's probably somewhere between 2 and 4, but up to 6 can work as well. Once you start getting beyond that, though, you're having to deal with a lot more people, and that probably starts to take away the enjoyment or the demand levels for certain buyers. So 2 to 3 to 4 is ideal, 5 or 6 is workable. Much beyond that, you need to really take into account other considerations. And then the final one is the position of the unit within the block. Now, the preference and certainly the first choice is usually the front, and that's primarily because you've got street frontage, you've got perhaps a nice outlook onto the street, perhaps a bit green because the front area will be grassed and gardened. Not always on title, that's okay, as long as you've got your own courtyard out the back that's still on title. And then the rear unit is also quite popular as well because of the privacy that you get. You don't get people coming past your unit. You can have an outlook onto your own rear courtyard at the back. So the middle units are perhaps the ones that you need to be a little bit cautious around. It doesn't mean they don't work. Sometimes they can feel as though that they've just been jammed in and you're feeling very exposed. So just there are some that still work really well. So it's not a case of anything in the middle, just write it off, but you just need to do a bit more due diligence. So they work really well because of those geographical locations and the availability that they've got. It gives a wider price range too, and gives from an affordability perspective. So you can look at some of the more inner suburbs, the blue chip areas in, say, around Burundara, Camberwell, Glen Iris, Surrey Hills, Baldwin, those types of locations, and there's some great villa units in those areas, and they're probably sitting between $800,000 up to $1 million and even more in certain markets. But if you start to move further out, there's some great villas available, and you can start to get them for anywhere between sort of $600,000 and $800,000. So if you start to move out, but the key part then is making sure if you're in those slightly more middle to outer ring suburbs, that geographically you have still got access to those services. It's a really important component, but there is affordable options for you. Just be mindful of where they sit and those distances from services. So today's case study, now villa units in the past have possibly been considered to be a bit like grandma's house, and they're a bit dated and a bit tired. And from a first-time buyer's perspective, they haven't always been that popular, but they're certainly becoming far more so. I had a client a few years come to me, and she was looking for her first home, but she wanted an investment grade property. That was the first and foremost what she was looking to buy. So location was a key component for her. She wanted to be in a good area. She didn't want to compromise her lifestyle too much. And was very hesitant about villas to start with. And so we went through the reason why I thought it would be a good option and the benefits for it. And once we'd had that discussion and we went and had a look at a few, she was quite comfortable with them. We ended up buying a property in Surrey Hills, which was a great purchase for her. It was a 2-bedroom unit. It was at the rear of a block of 4. And it was nice and close to Union Station, and so to Union Road and the shopping precinct in and around there. It was in original condition, which is what she wanted because it was something that she could add value. She was in the trading industry, so she had good contacts and wanted to be able to put her own touches to it. So we ended up buying something in the early 700s. And in the end, after she's done a full renovation on it, that property would now be worth well into the 8s. So it's served both purposes in that it's given that growth prospects, but it's giving her the lifestyle elements as well and the opportunity to add value, which was a key part to the brief that we had. So I think they're a really good option, villa units. I think it's something that people should consider. both from an investment point of view, but if you're looking for something that's going to give some good growth from a stepping stone point of view, they can be a good option from a first home buyer's perspective as well. So that's about it for episode 98 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. Obviously, please feel free to share the podcast far and wide with friends, family and relatives, and out onto all your social media channels. But if you'd like further information, visit our website, wakeland.com.au. Otherwise, we wish you all the best with your property decisions.